Sarah, we are here in the NEC Library. I'm very happy to talk to you about your project here. For the last 10 months, you've been here a NEC International Fellow.
Yes.
Could you tell us a bit about your academic background?
Sure. I received my PhD about 2 years ago, year and a half ago, from New York University. And in general, my topic of study is Jewish history in Eastern Europe, 19th and 20th century, and I focus on Poland, cultural history, and history of Jewish involvement in art museums, art collection, and ethnographic expeditions. So since finishing my doctorate, I spent a year doing freelance work and adjunct work, and I came here in order to conduct a little bit more research for the book manuscript, as well as to just write without obligations of teaching, to really get started on the manuscript.
So actually your project here was to turn your dissertation into a book manuscript?
Yes, that was the major goal, and I managed to do some other things as well, but that was the big project.
Your project is dealing with Jewish collecting and exhibiting items related to the Jewish history in Poland.
Yes.
We talk about Poland in Interwar period.
Yeah, Interwar, and then also just slightly before World War I as well.
Yeah, and you've done research in 3 different cities, or like...
Yes.
Could you tell us a bit about the historical context of your project?
Sure. So beginning around the 1890s or so, the turn of the century, there started to be a great interest both amongst Jews themselves, but also amongst Catholic Poles in Jewish ethnography. And at the same time, there was a great interest in kind of discovering the Polish people, who were considered to be Catholic, not Jewish, but the Polish peasant, kind of consolidating an idea of who Poles were. This is before Poland in its modern form came to be as a result of the First World War and the treaties afterwards. So Jews had a parallel interest in kind of their own ethnographic description, and a number of different, mainly kind of wealthy collectors from elite families decided to open Jewish museums based on their own collections or collections of others. And some of those projects also incorporated ethnographic expeditions to go out and collect material from people in neighboring villages to make some sort of photographic documentation of historic synagogues or cemeteries. And then the Great War, the First World War, really intervenes in this project. And all of a sudden, on the other side of it, first of all, you have a reconstituted Poland, and it's not quite clear at that point who was a Pole. Jews are suddenly Polish citizens, although that's also a little bit of a process, but it's not really clear. Do Jews really belong in this Poland? Do they not belong? Do they only belong if they're Polish speaking, or is everybody who lives in this territory Polish in some way? And so what I've discovered in the course of my work is that a lot of these projects, many of which were conducted in Polish, aim to prove that Jews really do belong on Polish soil, that there are unique but yet somehow parallel folkloric traditions, folk art being produced. And Jews tried to create and succeeded to some measure in creating Jewish museums in various cities that really highlighted Jewish contributions to Polish society and Jewish belonging within Poland.
So you've worked on collections and on writings developed in Warsaw,
Warsaw, and in Lviv, Interwar Lvov, and in Vilna as well. Those are my 3 main areas.
And were projects and of museums, Jewish museums, in these cities?
In those cities, yeah.
Yeah, at the time. I remember your presentation here at seminar was a presentation about traveling to Europe. US Jews traveling to Europe as a kind of rediscovering the land of origin of their families.
Yes.
This is not directly a project like part of your dissertation, but was a very interesting addition to the project. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. So it was part of my dissertation, this idea of instead of Polish Jews documenting Polish Jewish culture, immigrant Jews who had been living in Polish territories but had immigrated to the US and by and large become American citizens who chose to travel back to their hometowns after 1924, when it was nearly impossible that they would have relatives join them in the US. And so I had a chapter in my dissertation about that, but as I was working here and refining the manuscript, I realized it doesn't fit. It's too different, so I was able, for the presentation, also for the article I submitted, to develop this a little bit more, since I had to axe it from the dissertation, basically, from the manuscript. So I'm writing about these collections of home movies and also a collection of films made in Poland by Jews in Poland in the late 1930s, 1938, 1939, documenting Jewish life in 6 different cities. Only 5 of the films survive, so it looks like 5 cities, but originally there were 6. And trying to think about the connections between ethnography and ethnographic depiction and their relationship with memory, with nostalgia, with trying to make a break with the past, trying to establish some continuity with the past, trying to, for Jews who were living in the US who had come, let's say, 1910, 1911, and then 1926, 1927 go to Poland, they arrive in their hometowns, and their hometowns by and large are really different. Obviously they belong to a different governmental structure, but beyond that, so many people had emigrated either to the US, to Canada, to Palestine. Also, lots of people migrated internally within Poland to the cities. So a lot of what you see in these films, I think they wanted to have these beautiful homecomings, my childhood home, my school, my house, etc. And they were really met with kind of devastation. It was also a period of economic crisis. So you get there kind of an interesting look at what now American Jews wanted to see from the kind of old country, and then what they actually saw, and then how they transmitted that to their friends, their neighbors, and presumably their children and their families as well.
And these home movies are part of a larger collection.
They are, yeah. These are part of a collection they've been digitized by the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research. They're actually all available online, so it was easy to conduct some of this research remotely. So they belong to a larger collection. I think there are maybe 30 films in the whole collection. I write about 4 or 5, but.
And the films documenting the life of Jewish people in Poland, in the 6 cities, they had a kind of very interesting story. I mean, they were lost and somehow discovered.
Yes, so these films were, the backstory behind their creation has a little bit been lost. There is very little documentary evidence about them, and a lot of what we have is based on memories and recollections that were written down in the 1970s and 80s, so already it's a little bit hard to know exactly what's what. But the idea for the films was to document Jewish life in Poland before it was gone, not in the sense that people foresaw the Holocaust, but in the sense that it was very clear that Jewish life in Poland was becoming a little bit more perilous, and many Jews were emigrating, and perhaps Jewish life as we know it will no longer be present in 10 or 20 years. So a set of filmmakers from Sector Films, which had been working on Yiddish films, also some Polish language films. They actually continued into the post-war film period making films. Decided to do this documentation project on 6 cities. It's Warsaw, Łódź is the one that's lost, Białystok, Kraków, Lwów, and Vilna. And as I said, Łódź is lost, and they didn't have a backer for these films. They didn't have any funding. They had a little bit of money, but not enough. And the idea was that they would send a copy of these films, one to the town itself, and two to the US. And that in the US it would be shown, and American Jews could then send money back, and the films would finance themselves retroactively. So the films were sent just before the outbreak of war, sometime in late August 1939. And for completely unknown reasons, as the story goes, whoever was supposed to pick them up on the US side didn't show up. So they sat in the dead letter office for a few years, and they weren't picked up, I believe, 1942, maybe 43, certainly not until the early 40s. What happened to the sixth film it's unclear. So they were completely lost. And then by 1942, already the situation has entirely changed. And one thing I'm looking into now I wasn't able to discover is what were these films' earliest receptions, people who watched them in 1942, understanding, at least to the extent that one could, what was happening in Poland. This I haven't been able to find anything on, but I got intrigued when I was writing this paper in the presentation. What happened. Now we use them as nice documents in our classrooms, and they're interesting, but I want to know in the 40s how people viewed them, really.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting, and this initiative was done by Jewish intellectuals in Warsaw, in a very vibrant intellectual community.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
What was their profile and their connections with the Polish intellectual life at the time?
So the filmmakers, Shaul Goskind was kind of the main mover and shaker behind the project as well. His brother as well was involved. It's Goskind, and Shaul Goskind was, he a little bit accidentally became a filmmaker. He had originally intended to go to agricultural school. He ended up in film school, and he started, one of his first films was filming the celebration of Lag BaOmer, which is a summer holiday that involves building a large bonfire, usually. He was a member of the youth group Hashomer Hatzair, which was a young, somewhat left-leaning Zionist youth group, and he filmed one of their celebrations. And then after film school, he started producing, very slowly at first. They had a hard time getting financing, most of all, but also equipment. Started producing a number of films on Jewish topics, both feature films and also shorter films. And one thing I learned in the course of researching this is that they had some of the most modern sound equipment in their studio, which meant that they, even after some boycotts of Jewish businesses, they had to work with non-Jewish studios because they had this great sound equipment, so people couldn't boycott them, which was one of the reasons, apparently, that they established such close ties to the Polish film world kind of more broadly. And beyond that, the brothers were involved, right? So they were involved in Zionist activities. They had met with Vladimir Jabotinsky when he came to Warsaw in 1936, which is after they had established their studio, but before these films were made. And it was apparently this meeting with Jabotinsky that really encouraged them to write these films. Jabotinsky in Warsaw basically spoke about the imminent destruction of Polish Jewry. Again, like no idea how it would actually happen, but the idea that Polish Jewry wouldn't exist or shouldn't exist, and that Jews should emigrate to Palestine in the 1930s.
And what was the fate of these filmmakers? I mean,
the filmmakers both survived the war, and they died within, both of them, at least the two main ones, died within the past 10 or 15 years. They moved to Israel. And I'm trying to see now as well if there are more documents related to their lives. I'm not entirely sure what's available. But another younger filmmaker with whom they had worked, Natan Gross, wrote his memoirs partially about their film studio. He's also passed away at this point, so it's not possible to speak with him, but I'm looking in to see what else is available.
You've been here for the past 10 months with fellows from different disciplines and engaging with people from literary studies, sociology and other disciplines. How do you feel about this experience here?
I think it's great. I think that so often the work that we do in the humanities we do alone, we do at our computer, in the coffee shop, in our rooms, whatever. And even though it's studying human life, we don't interact with other humans always. So it's just been great to get fresh perspectives on the work. And I think that being able to present as well, I talked to fellows regularly about my project, about their projects, and just getting new and fresh perspectives is always valuable. And it's also it's valuable to have the sense of camaraderie and have someone to show your work to, someone you can run an idea by. And I was also able to participate a little bit in the broader intellectual community in Bucharest at some conferences, and so it's just wonderful, and it's great to be in a new environment. I think regardless, even though it's only 1 year, I think it's good to get out of your house, do something else, and then come back with some new ideas.
What is your perspective on Bucharest?
I like it. It has some problems as a city, but I really enjoy it. I mean, especially, I don't know how political I can get, but especially coming from the US. This was a horrible year to be, from my perspective, a terrible year to be American. And being out of the country and away from the constant news, even though, of course, I'm well connected to the internet, we have very fast download speeds here in Romania, I understand, but just being a little bit removed geographically was great. I speak a lot to my friends at home who, I think we all had trouble getting work done, but I think being geographically removed was helpful. I'll say that very much so. And I really enjoyed exploring Bucharest. I was here in 2004 for maybe 10 days or so in the fall, and I had a very different impression than I gained this time. So it's just great for me to be just in a different part of the world that isn't so connected to my research, but at the same time there are some connections. And then, of course, being able to travel as well to Lviv for some research, to Warsaw for some research was also fantastic.
What are your next plans?
So I'll return home, and then almost immediately after I will move to Washington State, to a town called Bellingham, which is just north of Seattle, where I will be the Jaffe Assistant Professor of Jewish History at Western Washington University. That was the other thing I did this year, was I went on the job market and I managed to get a job. So
congratulations.
Thank you.
So it's a tenure track.
It is a tenure track position. Amazing. I'm really happy about it. It's when I visited, it seems like a wonderful place to be, and I think it also helped being abroad. It's just something to talk about with an interview committee. So,
what would you say to young scholars, people finishing their PhDs or in the first years after having finished their PhDs, about applying to such a place like NEC?
I think it's a fantastic idea to apply to some place that gives you time to think. I think this was the most valuable, and it's hard to quantify, but it's the most valuable thing from here, to not have to teach, to be able to sit with your research a little bit, to know that when I was working after my PhD, I felt like there were certain hours of the day that I could work on the manuscript, and if I didn't do that, then it was like wasted time, because I was working, I was teaching, I was doing various other jobs, and the ability to think, okay, like, today I'm going to think through an idea, and if I don't write something, that's fine, because I know I can write something tomorrow. It's a real gift just to be able to come here to work. We're nicely set up, we have nice resources, our apartments are set up, you unpack your suitcase, you can start working. Just the ability to do that, I think, is so important. I don't know. I really think this gift of time is really important, and then also to have, especially for scholars working on European issues, I think it's very, very good to be able to interact with other young scholars from the region. Not only, obviously, we have fellows in our cohort who aren't working on European studies topics, but I think especially for people who are working on European literature, history, economics, the ability to interact with people from places I haven't been, places I'm not so familiar with, is also very, very valuable.
One of the advantages of this fellowship is that you have a month of
Yes.
research field. Where did you go, and what was your experience about that?
So I divided my month into two sections. So first I went to Lviv in Ukraine, and I spent part of the winter there, a few weeks in the winter. And in Lviv, I was able to do basically two things. I was able to revisit some materials that I had already seen, just to make a few corrections to my dissertation, let's say, and to look a little bit more for material that I knew was there, but that I hadn't been able to access the last time I was there doing research. So again, just working on the manuscript. And as well, I was able to locate some new files for a potential new project and just start reading through them, try to decide whether there was a project there. In fact, I've been thinking about some of the figures I came across when I was writing my dissertation were women who were involved in ethnography and also generally in education as well, and sometimes other philanthropic endeavors. And there were very few. My dissertation has 3 women in it. My book manuscript has 4. It's not so many. So I thought it would be interesting, since so many of these women were specifically interested in women's traditions of arts and crafts or women's proverbs and songs, that I would look really specifically at these women, what else they were involved in. So I was able to do that in Lviv as well, which was fantastic. And I also started to do a little bit of, urban geographical work in the city to be able to locate where I came across some old, not phone books, but address books, where some of these people lived within the city. To see, did they live in proximity to each other? Would they have passed each other on the street? There are old maps of Lviv. I was located at the Center for Urban History of East Central Europe, and they have a great old map collection of the city. And you can see, could they take a tram? Where would they go? Is it likely that they would have gone to the same parks? To get a sense a little bit more of some of this intellectual milieu on the ground. And then I went to Warsaw, where I did research in the Jewish Historical Institute and the National Library, looking at both some new works in Polish that aren't available yet here or in the US, I think, for the most part. And also to look through some newspaper collections in Warsaw that I hadn't had access to before, thinking about the press coverage that some of these museums received, not just the museum in Warsaw, also the museum in Lviv and elsewhere.
You are part of a new generation of scholars working on Jewish history in Eastern Europe. And what is the state of art? I mean, what is the sense of the field at this moment?
It's interesting. I think the field is changing, and I think you're right that there's kind of a wave. I think maybe we overestimate our numbers, or maybe we underestimate our numbers. I think that first of all, there's very much a renewed interest in Yiddish and Yiddish scholarship and being able to read Yiddish sources, not just as primary sources for kind of a Jewish history that's somehow ghettoized, but really for a Polish intellectual history. So there are a few new works that deal with Yiddish as a literary language in Poland that was in the Yiddish press tackling the same issues that were tackled in the Polish press, for example. So there's that, and I would also say that there's a very great interest in the interwar period as a time of possibility, and also I think there's a concomitant interest in nationalism in general in the interwar period. In Poland, also in Romania, that's an excellent period to investigate nationalism, investigate inter-ethnic group, either conflict or solidarity. And then I would say that there's also not quite fully formed, but rising interest as well in women's history in Poland. This is outside of Jewish studies, although including Jewish studies, and I think that that's filtering into Polish Jewish studies as well. And then for the region, I would say that I attended a conference here in Bucharest dealing with archiving Holocaust testimony. So I also see perhaps similar trends happening here, at least in the realm of Holocaust studies, perhaps also interwar period. Although I'm not fully conversant in the Romanian academy, so I couldn't say. But.
And in the US, what is the hot themes in Jewish history, European Jewish history, and where is the field going?
It's tough to say. I mean, I think that one of the things I thought about with my new position is that, first of all, it's a new position, it's not replacing anyone, so there is, I think, a growing interest in Jewish studies and Jewish history. I think that for a long time, Jewish history was about the history of Jewish religious tradition and text and textual interpretation in the history of religious movements, which is very, very important. Now, I think there is a much, and this isn't new, this is maybe within the last 10, 20 years, but a move towards more cultural studies, especially women's history, and especially understanding Jewish culture in Europe, Jewish cultures in Europe as a part of European culture and also as a different manifestation of Jewish history. And as well, I think that there's a growing interest, and I hope it continues because it's at this point very underrepresented in Sephardic Jewish history, Sephardic studies. And on the West Coast, where I'll be headed, there's actually much larger Sephardi communities. So I'm hoping as well to learn more about that field because there aren't so many scholars working on it, and I would like to encourage my students to go in that direction a little bit.
With this new position and finishing your, and hopefully very, very soon publication of your book, what is the new kind of projects you are open to?
Well, as I said, I became interested in this this idea of women and women's education as a facet of ethnography. I found a number of educators, particularly who were involved in education of orphans, training them in manual crafts, but using kind of traditional techniques of lace making, stuff like that. So that's a potential project, maybe not a book, maybe just an article, I'm not sure. And I also became interested when I was here in refugee relief efforts originating from the Romanian Jewish community from 1933 onwards to help German Jews and then also Polish Jews. So I just started looking in Romanian archives. I have a long list of files, which I won't get to, but I'm thinking about that as a potential investigation as well, depending on if I can come back, depending on taking a Romanian class. These are all possible futures.
Sarah, good luck with everything, and thank you again for your.
Thank you.